Hello, welcome to episode 149 of the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. It's brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, the unified voice of the AICPA and CIMA. From the AICPA and CIMA office in the heart of London's financial district, I'm Kyle Hannon, and in this episode, we'll be talking about International Women's Day. And I'm not going to be doing that all by myself.
And I'm Shelley Frazier from beautiful Raleigh, North Carolina. Today I'll be joining Kyle to talk about International Women's Day and the struggles women are facing in the accounting profession.
Thanks so much for downloading this episode of the Go Beyond Disruption podcast, where every week we bring you insights from inside the accounting and finance profession that helps you stay ahead of the curve wherever you work and whatever kind of work you do. This week, we're talking about International Women's Day 2021. Recorded just after International Women's Day, which was the 8th of March, and I'm joined by Shelley Frazier, the voice you heard a minute ago. She's Senior Manager for Diversity and Inclusion Women's Initiatives here at the association. So, Shelley, welcome. Plug us into your world for a minute. We've said something about where you're based. You mentioned Raleigh in North Carolina. Tell us a little bit about Raleigh and about yourself and how you came to the role you're in today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Kyle. I'm so excited given the timing. As you mentioned, it was just International Women's Day. And here in the States, we celebrate Women's History Month all through the whole month of March. So it couldn't be more perfect timing to have this conversation with you. So as you mentioned, I sit here in the States on our diversity and inclusion team, focused primarily on women's initiatives. So how I came to this role is kind of your typical accountant story. After 6-ish years as an auditor at a large public accounting firm, I joined the AICPA on the firm services team. I was working a bit on our CPA firm gender survey, which looks into the statistics of the retention and the advancement of women at CPA firms here in the States. And I was completely shocked about the lack of retention and advancement of women in our profession. So I became super interested and passionate about helping other women succeed. And after having my own daughter in August of 2019, and then returning back to the workforce, I experienced firsthand why many women leave the profession, and I felt compelled to work in this space. So this career opportunity lined up perfectly with my personal life circumstances, and I was so excited to take on this role in March of 2020.
Okay, so it is your first year anniversary of the return to the AICPA, is it?
It's my first year anniversary of this new role. So I've stayed with the AICPA, but I took on this new role in Women's Month last year.
Right. So I'll ask you a little bit more about that role and who you work with. But you did mention something about being shocked about the lack of retention. Can I ask what perhaps you were expecting before the data pointed you in a slightly less positive direction?
You know, that's a good question. As a woman in the profession, I mean, it was glaringly obvious that women are less likely in leadership roles in the accounting profession in particular. But within my class, or my starting class at the firm I worked at, it was 50-50. So you expect that the women would continue to advance, that the women in my class wouldn't just fall out of the profession. I expected to see my colleagues continue to remain in the profession with me. So the fact that we have less than a quarter of our leadership levels in the accounting profession are made up of women is just shocking and disheartening as a woman in the profession. So
this may or may not be as shocking, but it certainly is startling. Apparently there were more CEOs called Peter than there were women CEOs in the FTSE 100 companies until July 2020. So apparently the numbers became level after that, but that just shows you sometimes the stats can be surprising. All right, so let's go back to your role. Give us a sense of what you do in that role with the AICPA, the kind of sector or client types that you'd engage with, and where you engage with them in terms of the pivot points that you'll work to help them with.
Certainly. So I am the staff liaison for the AICPA Women's Initiatives Executive Committee. It's a mouthful, We call ourselves WIC. And that's an amazing group of volunteers, both men and women, who are passionate about advancing women in the profession. So their mission is to promote the support and success of women to advance the profession together. So I primarily work with them on developing resources and toolkits to benefit women, to amplify women's voices in the profession, to provide continued educational opportunities for women in the profession, and to help level out that gender parity in our leadership levels. All of our work benefits all of our AICPA and CIMA members. It's completely free and open to the public. And so we try to access women early in their careers and take them all the way up through that career trajectory into those leadership roles.
So what have you been up to for International Women's Day 2021?
Yeah, so we have been super busy, of course. So to celebrate International Women's Day, we spoke with several women members all around the globe, asking them to provide insight on how women have led us through the pandemic. You can find that video on our social media channels on YouTube, the advice there, and just hearing, like I said, women from all across the globe and how they've found motivation and inspiration through the last challenging year. It's amazing to see. We've also been working on blog posts, both on the AICPA and CIMA blog channels, capturing some of those key takeaways from those many conversations we had for International Women's Day. We had a press release earlier this month to kind of kick off Women's History Month. That featured insights from our 2020 Most Powerful Women in Accounting here in the States, and it focused on 5 things that organizations can be doing to build a culture that provides greater gender equity in the workplace. And we'll be culminating on March 23rd with a webcast. That webcast is called Forging the Path, Women in the Accounting Profession. We'll be having a panel of women in leadership roles talking about their leadership paths, how they got there, the roadblocks they had to overcome on the way, their favorite blog posts or podcasts they like to listen to. I'm super excited, so mark your calendars for that date as well.
And we'll make that doubly easy by putting links to all of that in our show notes. So as things happen, those show notes should take you to where people can explore those resources or add items to their own calendars. Now, you've been doing lots of stuff. You've mentioned blog posts, videos, and of course, you've been doing some research. So what's your latest research added to what you already know about women in the profession today?
Yeah, so as I mentioned at the beginning, which kind of was a startling stat to myself, was that women make up about half of all new accounting hires, but less than a quarter of partners in firms here in the States. And that percentage is even lower when ethnic groups are considered. And of course, we can't ignore the effects that the pandemic has had. It's endangered the progress made by creating even additional barriers that are unique often to women, you know, the challenges of being the primary caregiver of children or caring for aging parents. So we know that the McKinsey & Company's 2020 Women in the Workplace report said that 1 in 4 women considered downshifting their careers or leaving the workforce due to COVID-19, and that women have accounted for nearly 56% of workforce exits since the start of the pandemic. Now, those aren't accounting profession specific statistics, but still, it's obvious that the last year has greatly impacted the career trajectories of many women across all industries and all professions.
You can't argue with the general picture it paints. And even if people are holding on to their roles, many of them would be, I think you discovered, they would consider changing careers, if not leaving or stopping work entirely. Was that the case as well?
Right, absolutely. Changing careers to something more demanding, possibly going on a reduced work hour schedule, reduced workload, just anything that they could do in order to make the last year more bearable.
And I think you've put your finger on something important, because while we know, and this is something we talk about in the podcast every week, disruption is always with us. It never stops. But we have never had a disruption like this. And I doubt we've ever had to factor in something that's caused as much of an impact to our professional and our personal lives as this pandemic has. What about women in the accounting and finance profession? Because I suppose for many people, you'd think, well, surely they wouldn't be affected as much because they may be in professional roles, remote working is possible. They're not always in customer facing roles, if you're an accountant or a finance professional, but still they're impacted, aren't they? So Shelley, tell me what your data has shown about the way that professional women in your part of the world have been most impacted.
So the pandemic has obviously intensified challenges that women already faced, whether they are in accounting or other fields. I mean, working mothers have always worked sort of a quote unquote double shift where they have a full day of work followed by time caring for children, and then doing household labor, cooking dinner, cleaning the dishes. And of course, males play a role in this as well, but arguably women have shouldered a lot of this burden, specifically during the pandemic. And now the supports that were made possible previously to the pandemic, including childcare and school, they were all closed down and upended, and we weren't able to see our family and seek help or have grandmother watch our child. So the work on women and the mental load on women has just intensified. And then, not to mention, Black women already face more barriers to advancement than most other employees in today's world. So now they're coping with the greater impact of COVID-19 on the Black community and that emotional toll, along with the repeated instances of racial violence that occurred in 2020. So this year has been tough to your point, on all professional women.
And we don't know which way it's going to go, do we? Because the year is only just starting. As is this conversation. We'll be actually continuing this conversation in a minute, joined by my colleague, Shelley Frazier. She's Senior Manager for Diversity and Inclusion and Women's Initiatives here at the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. That's the Aicpa and CIMA. And we're talking about International Women's Day 2021. What's challenging women in the profession? Shelley, how have you reflected that theme and the resources and the content that you mentioned a little earlier?
Yeah, first and foremost, I want to mention that our AICPA Diversity and Inclusion team as a whole participated in the Choose to Challenge campaign. That is the International Women's Day organization's theme for this year's International Women's Day. And we reflected that theme in our content directly by agreeing to challenge inequality, calling out bias, and addressing all forms of gender inequality wherever we see it. In our resources and our blogs and the press release I mentioned before, we explored how gender equality benefits both women and men, and we challenged everyone to be more inclusive. We challenged everyone to look around you in your important meetings or your events, whether they are in a virtual setting now or if you're back in person. And are women and women of color well represented? If not, you need to do some serious thinking and reshape that invitation and include women and people of color in your meetings where your strategy and vision and critical decisions are being made, even if they aren't in those leadership levels yet.
Now, with our audience being more of a global audience, anytime we talk about rights, equality, diversity, inclusion, we understand that we're talking about that from a particular perspective. Topics of conversation that are important in different ways in different parts of the world. And I come from one of those more far off places, originally from South Africa. And that actually takes me back to this question of challenge, because I was reading about International Women's Day on a South African news website just a couple of days ago. And as I said, I'm interested in a more kind of a global take on many of these things we talk about. And I was quite struck by an article about the role of women in traditional African societies. I'm originally from Cape Town. My family live in fact, the big town where Nelson Mandela is actually from. And in traditional African society, the women were very much the topic of conversation in this article. And they talked about how sometimes life can become so challenging that you simply don't have time to voluntarily add any more challenges to your plate. And that got me thinking about the additional power of this International Women's Day theme, the theme Choose Your Challenge. And I understand that for some women, it could mean my career is developing well. I'm ready to level up by taking on more responsibilities. In fact, Shirley, you and I were talking earlier about those stretch goals that we often hear about. Does that sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
We've all heard that. Or promotion. You talk about some actively taking the pandemic as an opportunity to kind of stretch themselves or go for a promotion, that kind of thing. Their choice is made on the basis of being ready for more, because women in that position have now got things in their career where they need them to be. They can go onward, they can go upward, or choose to go sideways. You did mention that they may be reprioritizing. It's a choice. In this case, they choose to add a challenge. They've said yes to that. Now, that is very much a component of this choose your challenge, isn't it?
Definitely, yeah. Women have to assess where they are and decide what they're ready to take on.
But the article also reminded me that there's another perspective, that sometimes you have to choose between competing challenges. Sometimes, and you were talking about this a little earlier, sometimes there's no space in life or in bandwidth to add challenges. Instead, you have to choose which challenges you have to be focusing on. And this pandemic's made that very clear. We can't do everything. In this case, choose your challenge can mean choose your battles. One shouldn't feel you have to accept or take on every single challenge. And there's nothing wrong with saying, I have priorities and I choose this challenge. Well, I choose to leave that other challenge for another time. And sometimes that's even more challenging, isn't it? Because it takes courage and it takes decisiveness when it's a time to say no. Have I put my finger on something there?
Yeah, absolutely, Kyle. So this year more than ever, we as women have to celebrate any win that we can have. And we absolutely have to remind ourselves that what we're doing is enough. What we are is enough. We have to prioritize well-being and self-care, and we must prioritize our mental health above all else. I mean, speaking for myself, in terms of last year, I mean, I mentioned before, last March, at the very start of the pandemic, I took on this brand new role at work. My daughter's daycare closed, so I was working full time. My husband was working full time, and we had an 8-month-old at home. What were we going to do? So I had to have some challenging conversations with my husband. I had to have some challenging conversations with my boss. I had to set very clear boundaries with my team at work and my team at home, so my husband. It was impossible for me to take on a single stretch assignment, to your point, or any extra work for that matter. I was struggling to just manage my routine day-to-day tasks. Even just taking care of my family seemed more challenging during a pandemic. So I had to make the choice then to say no. For me, I think that transparency with my boss, that transparency with my husband and my family, and that transparency with myself, acknowledging that I couldn't do it all, was eye-opening and quite critical to the way we handled last year. I mean, I knew this called on other teammates who maybe didn't have as young kids at home to step up, and I hope that I can repay that favor in the future, but I had to do it for my own mental health and mental well-being. I had to say no.
It's absolutely fine to put our hands up and say, this is going to work and that isn't. And actually, people are okay with having those conversations. We should have the courage to have them.
Definitely. I think that we have to be brave enough to say no. I think there's this notion in our career that we always have to be working for the stretch assignment, or we always have to be taking on that extra work. And to be honest, in our accounting profession, at least here in the States, I know our culture is very slightly, but there's this bragging right of being busy, of how many hours you've worked, of how much time you've logged at work. And
that's even worse when we're at home all the time, isn't it? Because there's that boundary between, hey, I'm at the office, which is where I work, and now I'm at home, this is where I don't. Because that boundary at the moment isn't here, sometimes things blur, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. I've had so many times where at night I'm like, oh, I could just hop on and quickly answer that one email. And before I know it, it's been an hour and a half and I've been sitting at my computer again. So I definitely encourage everyone, and I had to do it for myself. I do not allow myself to do that. I mean, of course, in times of deadlines or things that absolutely must need to be done, everyone would pick up what they need to pick up, but we have to set those boundaries, and we have to your point, we have to be brave enough to say no. And if you're a leader in your organization, whether you're a man or a woman, you need to create an environment. If your employees are feeling overwhelmed or overworked, they need to feel safe and respected, not penalized or judged for saying no or for saying, I can't take on anything else.
Or I choose not to.
Exactly.
And I think that's the power encapsulated in that choose to challenge theme for 2021. And you earlier mentioned that the association have been putting out a lot of content and resources for International Women's Day. Love you to highlight some of those for us again. But also, you've talked about saying yes, but also saying no. It's not simply been a single interpretation.
No, exactly. We have encouraged women to know when to ask for help, and we encourage them to schedule time to take breaks for themselves, whether that means to go for a walk, to meditate or practice gratitude, or enjoy some extra time with your families, whatever you need to level set, and make that clear with your team. Put it on your calendar. Make it clear, make it a priority. And we also talk about the fact that there's no one-size-fits-all approach for saying no or for what you choose to challenge to tie it in. We can't compare one woman to the next woman, and our leaders need to be flexible and respectful of what we choose to focus on. That does not mean asking them to work all hours of the night. It means truly offering flexibility and listening to our employees, what they need, how they need to be supported, and potentially developing unique solutions for each employee based on what they choose.
Yeah, pay attention to ourselves, pay attention to others, and expect people to pay attention to us as humans, which is important. Now, just to show you that I've been paying attention to you, I know that you did mention that you've done a tremendous job speaking to women members all around the world. You provided insight on how women have been leading through the pandemic. There's a video you've put together, which is now up on YouTube and on social. We'll put a link to that video in our show notes. How long is the video, by the way? It's just a short one, isn't it? It's not a documentary.
No, it's three and a half minutes.
Excellent. Okay. Good enough for anyone. You also mentioned there are blog posts on the AICPA website as well as CIMA. Key takeaways from those conversations you've talked about. You did mention that there'd be more insights coming from your 2020 Most Powerful Women in Accounting. Those conversations, did you say there are things that organizations can do to build a culture that provides greater equity? 5 things, I think you mentioned.
Yes.
Is that right? Can you share at least one of those with us? Don't tell us everything, but what was one of the things that you think stood out, one of those 5?
One of them is to be flexible. And to what I just mentioned, make sure that you truly are being flexible. That doesn't mean just allowing them to shift their work hours. Be flexible. And what does that mean? Does that mean that the woman reprioritizes their work and you say, okay, these are the tasks that absolutely needs to get done, and these are the tasks that would be nice if they got done. It doesn't mean just be flexible at the times that they can work.
Got you. And you said coming up a little later in the month, there's that webcast, Women in the Accounting Profession, that's called Forging the Path, coming up on March 23rd, I think.
Yeah.
We'll certainly, is that free?
It is not free.
Okay. So if you go to future.alcpa.org or many of the websites for the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, you will always find a blend of resources. Some of them are free, some of them paid for. So make your own choices. That website link will be in our show notes. Now, we are recording this in early March 2021, which means we've got most of the rest of 2021 still to look forward to. Look ahead for us. Where can people catch up with you online or in real life? And are there any conferences or events coming up that you want to share with us?
Of course, we have so much in the works, and I'm so excited about everything we have coming up. hoping that we'll have some semblance of our new normal moving forward.
Fingers crossed.
Right? We have our entire diversity, equity, and inclusion track with several women's focused sessions at the association's Big Engage conference in Las Vegas this summer. We also are celebrating the 10th anniversary of our Women's Global Leadership Summit, and that will have events around the globe. I know that the Americas event is going to be November 3rd through 5th in Dallas this year. Super excited about that networking event. And you heard it here first, but we'll be launching a women's focused podcast this spring. I'm super excited about the podcast. The goal is to amplify women voices in the profession and create a community where all women feel empowered to succeed and have a sense of belonging and a value to the profession. So we're hoping to explore that through conversations with women leaders in the profession.
It's good news. It sounds exciting. I always like it when people talk about another podcast from the Aicpa and CIMA. That's good to know. And who's going to be on it? Can you give us an idea of whose voices we can hear? I would imagine you'll be one of the presenters.
Absolutely. Of course. Yes, I will be the host. We will also have some of my colleagues from your side of the pond hosting every once in a while as well. And we are going to start with conversations with some of our 2020 Most Powerful Women in Accounting Award recipients. We're hoping to have a conversation with Tracy Golden, the current AICPA chair. We'll have conversations with our Women's Initiative Executive Committee chair, varying women throughout the profession. I'm super excited to hear their stories and the challenges they faced and how they got to where they are.
What else is there for people to join? Let's say they can't get to a conference, they can't download the podcast yet, no matter how much they'd like to. What else can they get involved in when it comes to diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, an easy one to do is to follow us on social media. We have you can join the AICPA Diversity and Inclusion group on LinkedIn, or you can look for the CIMA Women in Leadership Forum on LinkedIn. You can check out many, many, many of our resources I mentioned earlier that are free and open to everyone at aicpa.org/womenlead. And there are some archived webcasts on there that are free. Or you can follow our hashtags, hashtag AICPA Women Lead or hashtag CIMA WIL Forum.
Does that stand for Women in Leadership?
It does.
See? More than just a pretty face, me. Finally, we've all heard the expression, been there, got the T-shirt. So if I gave you an imaginary T-shirt and you were to print one sentence on the front, a sentence that delivered a simple message for someone to take away from our conversation today, Shelley Frazier, what would that T-shirt say?
So this is a really tough one for me, and I couldn't narrow it down. So I'm going to go with two. Both of them are from inspirational women. The first is from fashion designer Coco Chanel. And I'm going to paraphrase her a little bit, but a woman should be two things, who and what she wants. And the second is from the great RBG.
That's Ruth Bader Ginsburg to the rest of us, isn't it?
That's right. Yep. And she said, women belong in all places where decisions are being made.
Marvelous. Shelley Frazier, thank you so much for joining us on the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. Shelley is Senior Manager for Diversity and Inclusion Women's Initiatives here at the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, talking about what's challenging women in the profession, International Women's Day 2021. You can find links to all the resources and other things to explore. That will all be in our show notes, and we encourage you to go and explore as much of that as possible, and keep your eyes and your ears open for the online conferences for Engage and the podcast coming out shortly. Shelley, just remind us, what's the podcast going to be called?
Oh, we don't have a title yet, Kyle.
Aha, so
it's a surprise.
You'll be back to share that with us as soon as there is an official title, I'd imagine.
Or submit your suggestions to Kyle.
Well, I'll be happy to pass on any suggestions. Thank you, Shelley.
Thanks, Kyle.
And remember that if you are listening to this podcast, perhaps way after International Women's Day 2021, you can always go back and explore this episode, explore the links, and listen to many other podcasts that we recorded for previous International Women's Day 2019, 2018. You'll find those all in our back catalogue, all free and all available at the tap of a button on your phone. And you can follow us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your music. You can find the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. And if you need to find out a little bit more about all of those links, you'll find them all in one place at gobeyonddisruption.com. That is gobeyonddisruption.com. From the AICPA and CIMA office in London, I'm Kyle Hannon. We'll be back in a week with more insights from inside the accounting and finance profession that keep you and your business ahead of the curve. Till then, keep listening and keep safe. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Disruption, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. Learn more about today's topic at aicpa-cima.com/disruption. This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. It is provided with the understanding that the association, its affiliates, and subsidiaries are not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The association, its subsidiaries, and affiliates make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to and assume no responsibility for the content or application of the material contained herein and expressly disclaim all liability for such damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.